of a prominent opposition leader, Sergei Udatsov, was extended till August amid charges of plotting alleged mass riots and attacks on police during last May's anti-Kremlin protests. This coming after a pro-Kremlin television station, NTV, broadcast a documentary claiming that Udatsov and his associates were planning an uprising funded by a Georgian lawmaker. Now, meanwhile, the trial of a dead man continues in the Russian capital. Whistleblowing attorney Sergei Magnitsky, who died in police custody in 2009, who posthumously is accused of false accusations of money laundering against state services. And it's not just Moscow. All across the country, since the start of last week, more than 100 non-governmental organizations have received the unannounced visit of authorities, auditing their books, inspecting the premises. The follow-up, say critics, to a recent law that obliges NGOs that receive funding from abroad to register as, quote, foreign agents. Why now? 1 year before he hosts the Winter Games in Sochi, Vladimir Putin remains very popular at home. Commodity prices are high, and last year's unprecedented protests against his re-election are to many a fading memory. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at how the Kremlin is cracking down with Sasha Kulaeva of the International Federation for Human Rights. Welcome to the show. Welcome from Moscow, former member of parliament Natalia Narochnitskaya, president of the Institute of Democracy and Cooperation. Thank you for being with us. Also with us, historian George Frederick Jewsbury here in the studio, and France 24's Douglas Herbert, the France 24 debate, where you can always join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Let's begin with you, Sasha Kulaeva, the International Federation for Human Rights. You say you have three partner organizations in Russia. Since these sweeping audits began, have they received the visits from authorities?
Yes, all of them did, yeah.
What happened? I mean, what are they looking for? What happened exactly?
Well, actually, it was quite different in every single case because, as far as I understand that, there was a general order which was given from, as we say in Russian, very high. And then it goes on the lower level, and then on the lower level. And then, for example, in St. Petersburg, they had 5,000 organizations to check, but they don't have enough people, they don't have enough institutions to do so. So they send everybody they can. They formed what they call the mobile groups, mobile brigades. There was people from the Ministry of Justice, anti-extremist unit, fire brigades, and even the institutions normally charged of checking their schools for children diseases. And all these strange people in very weird combinations went to different NGOs charged to find something. They don't know exactly what, but they were charged to find something.
What did they look at, for instance?
Papers, mainly. Everything connected with taxes, finances, indeed. But also starting from the statutes of the organization and going into the details such as the vaccinations of the employers, they were looking for everything. And also the security, fire situation and everything. We had feelings that they were thinking that in case of, they have to check everything. And then in case someone tells them something should be found, at least they have some elements.
Did this come as a surprise to you?
Not really, because in 2012, as you know, 5 or 6 laws were adopted, one after another. One on foreign agents, what is called foreign agents law. Then there was this law on state treason. Then there was a law on manifestations, NGOs, everything in the same time. So we were expecting something to happen. But as usual in Russia, the size of the country, the variety of levels of the responsibilities and of the institutions involved make things very different from one part of the country to another, and all the NGOs are being checked, not only human rights, not only political, not only humanitarian, all the NGOs being checked, even Alliance Française, like student houses and things like that. But what I want to precise that in some cases, and this is a case, for example, of Memorial or Human Rights Watch or some other important human rights organizations, these checks are accompanied by TV, by the famous NTV team, which is always making kind of propaganda movies and propaganda stuff on the very state-oriented TV. And when you see the choice of the NGOs visited by these TV teams, you understand what was it all about. Without taking into consideration all these thousands of NGOs checked.
Douglas Herbert?
I just wanted to add, you were asking before, like, why now? What's interesting about this is, you're right, the law was passed in July of last year. And I think at the time, even though we've seen patterns similar to this in recent years in Russia, a lot of people thought that they weren't perhaps going to enforce it. They weren't going to act on it. It was tough talk. It was geared towards a political audience. It sounded good for Putin's domestic audience. But then Putin himself, just a few weeks ago, back in February, he was delivering some remarks, and he's the one who essentially activated what had been a dormant law, because he said that we are not going to allow any interference in our internal domestic affairs from outside the country. Now, if you're one of Putin's henchmen, or if you're anywhere in that presidential administration, that might sound like an innocuous comment, harmless, but a lot of people who were listening to those remarks took that as those are their marching orders. Putin himself, he wants us to act. He doesn't want this to be an idle law. He doesn't just want it to sit and gather dust.
Natalia Narochnitskaya, why is this going on? Why the need to audit all these NGOs?
I myself am head of 2 NGOs, one in Paris that you mentioned, and also I'm a president of an analytical foundation in Moscow, Foundation for Historical Outlook. And I have regular checking from the government, from the tax organs, and we always have to show all our documents. Every provision of our budget and expenditures is checked against the declared goals of my organization. And I'm not surprised at all. But of course, I return to the beginning of the words of my distinguished counterpart, Sasha Kulaeva, that in all cases, it has been done differently. And of course, I'm not naive. I know about the lack of political and professional culture of our organs and the specific functionaries. And of course, if there is an order or a desire, then on the low level, these people may have done something beyond the legal procedure. I can believe that, although I don't know the facts. But the society of Russia is certainly very much alarmed, and believe me, there is no sympathy from the vast majority of the population with regard to the NGOs that are engaged in political life, and because they receive grants and allowances from foreign countries. And you know that such organizations, it is well known as Freedom House, and they are financed by...
Oh, the sound seems to have cut out. We apologize for that. We'll try to fix that as quick as possible. Natalia Narochnitskaya saying that the vast majority of Russians are alarmed by these foreign-financed NGOs.
Yeah, there is something which I think is very important, is what have been said. Of course, there is a real problem with the image of the NGOs, but where the problem starts and where it comes from. For example, the NTV team, which was accompanying the verification, the checks and the memorial, distributed their reportage on what was happening before the verification was not only over, but when it was still going on in the offices of Memorial. And the title of this program was Memorial is hiding its money incomes from the population.
Memorial being a human rights organization.
Main human rights organization in Russia. So indeed, when speaking about the image, when the state TV, well, generally speaking, state TV, we can call it this way, or at least state-oriented TV, tells the responsibility and the crime before it's not only proven, but even before the verification is going to its end. Of course, there is a problem with the trust. But I think that when you see how many people go to these organizations, like Memorial, like Citizen Watch, or Civic Assistance, or others, to seek for help they don't get from the state, you see that this trust is indeed in the population still, despite all these defamation methods of the state.
Russia's president last week staunchly denying any ulterior motive in that decision to swoop on those organizations.
The goal of all these inspections is to check to see if, first of all, the activity of other NGOs corresponds to their stated goals. Secondly, whether or not the activity corresponds to the law of the Russian Federation, which prohibits the financing of political activity from abroad. You know, by the way, that there's nothing restrictive about those laws. There are no repressive sanctions. Everyone just needs to bring their activities in line with the law of the Russian Federation.
George Frederick Dewsbury, your reaction to that?
As a historian, I can look back upon the last couple of centuries and see the fact that in the 19th century, the Tsar is good, but sometimes his people go a bit far. And as our colleague in Moscow said, sometimes these things are carried out in a strange way. And this is a comment on the fact that the state is weak in Russia, the law is weak in Russia, the carrying out of the law is weak in Russia. I would say that the vast majority of the Russian people are more concerned with the corruption of the police than they are with the activities of the NGOs. Second thing I want to bring up is why now? Putin was coming back from a meeting of the BRICS in Africa and decided he'd call for a military practice session in the Black Sea on the way up from Africa. He forgot to tell the Ukraine, he forgot to tell Georgia. He just launched out from the seat of the fleet, if you will, this exercise. And one
the
wonders,
audits of the NGOs, though, began before he went to the BRICS summit.
Yeah, but why now? Things are going pretty well for him. He's won on this thing of the stage 4 of the missiles that the Americans are going to put up in Poland and Slovakia. I'm really puzzled by why he's doing this now.
All right, Natalia Narochnitskaya, I believe we have the connection back. Apologies for the technical problems we had. Why is it that all this is going on right now?
Why? Actually, I am co-sponsor. I have been co-sponsor of the law that regulates the NGOs as in my years at the Duma, but. I've seen the documents of one organization where it was clearly stated that one of the goals is to train people to participate in political life in the interest of another state. And the next day, somebody commented in the blogs about it. It was cleared out from Google. So it would be unthinkable in America, for instance, where I have worked for 8 years for the United Nations in the 80s, that an NGO working in the United States could receive money and allocation from another state. It would be a criminal offense there. Why should it be allowed in Russia? As far as I know that some experts say that the government loses popularity, that's why it wants to suppress the opposition NGOs. Let us divide these two issues. As far as I see and feel, and believe me, I'm quite honest, the popularity is the same. And the majority of our people have a lot of protest, but not against this allegedly suppression of NGOs. They protest against low income, etc. But they now welcome very much the efforts to crush corruption, because every day when you switch on the TV, you see that somebody of high officials was either sentenced or detained or suspended from his position. People welcomed very much the cleaning of the Ministry of Defense and the new appointment of Mr. Shoigu. By the way, he was and he is one of the most popular people in the United Russia, which is not very popular.
All right, so this crackdown you're saying is low on the list of priorities of most Russians.
Well, I want to respond to something she's saying. First of all, the language of this law is not neutral. This is not just some law that was put on. In Russian, iностранный агент is the foreign agent. This is reminiscent of the stuff we saw back in the Soviet days. We've heard a lot of talk about this. It's the espionage era. It's not. It's a very subjective term. in the sense that there's a taint associated. Hold on one second. Let me just finish, please. There's a when you use the label, and this is the label attached to this law, as foreign agent, there's a taint there, and the taint is especially associated often with the United States of America. Some of the graffiti that has been spray painted in Moscow on the facades of some of these human rights organizations, it will say foreign agent, love USA. So in Russia, remember, a country right now divided between many generational forces. A lot of people only get their information from state TV, and then you have a lot of younger people getting their information more freely, perhaps from internet sources. But for a lot of people, it does start to sink in. They see that U.S., foreign funding, foreign agent, it all becomes of a whole. And it really, that association does begin to become embedded in the way, in your whole mentality, in your whole outlook. In other words, it works. When Putin sends that message, whether he explicitly says it or not, he doesn't have to. A lot of Russians who hear that, of a certain generation perhaps, of a certain inclination, will believe it and will buy it, and it sinks in.
Sasha Kuleyeva, it still doesn't quite answer the question of why now.
Yeah, I think there are three important points which partly answer to your question. First, since my colleague has been working in United Nations, you definitely know about the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, which is United Nations declaration ratified and signed by all the countries of United Nations, including Russia, and which states that freedom of assembly and association is a fundamental right, and part of it is a freedom to look for, receive, and use the foreign funding, any independent funding, including foreign. So in Russia or anywhere else, it's a fundamental right of the associations, whether human rights, opposition, or any educational or any others, to look for, to get and to use foreign funding. That's the first remark I wanted to make. The second one is that it's a huge mistake indeed to speak about opposition NGOs. Because NGOs, for example, defending human rights, are just defending human rights, and it's very regrettable that the state sees the defense of human rights as an opposition activity. Normally this should be an activity granted by state and protected by state, and it's really regrettable, but unfortunately quite significant that Russian state at this stage sees defense of human rights as opposition activities. And finally, I wanted to underline that normally under the Russian law, which we are the first ones to ask to respect, the verifications should be done under the warrant of the prosecutor office, and not just by a desire of a president to check all and whatsoever NGOs around the country. So what would be interesting would be to see the warrant of the prosecutor office asking for this verification and noting at which basis and which legal basis suspecting of what.
Right, so you're not quite
NGOs,
sure
yeah.
who's ordering what in this instance. When we come back, we'll pick up on that point and react to it. You're watching the France 24 debate.